This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic 2 by Matthew J. DiStefano. Ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about faith? In Heretic 2, I dive into LGBTQ affirmation, rejecting divine violence, and embracing universalism in a bold post-Christian perspective. If you're done with outdated dogma and want a justice-oriented, inclusive view of spirituality, then this book is for you. Get Heretic 2 wherever books are sold and start rethinking faith today. This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Radical Love Life, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I am freaking awesome as always. How about you?
I love that.
I know you do. And it's true. I am freaking awesome, even though this past month has been like a couple of colds and then a little norovirus. But you know what? It didn't kill me. So as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right. Yeah, and I ignore the one that says what doesn't kill you evolves to try to come back and kill you again.
Do you know, I've never heard that.
That's virology for you. It just
there
keeps
it
going
is,
back,
exactly. And what does it? We'll come back to try to kill you again.
That's right. But I'm training the ninjas in my immune system because I had COVID like a month ago and it just like wave after wave of secondary infections since then. So yeah, if I sound a little scratchy, it's not just that I've been smoking cigarettes outside with the bad kids.
Well, yeah, you have dialed down your habit to what, about 2 packs a day? So well, I can tell the difference. So good. All right. So what are we up to today, my beloved friend?
Well, today we have guest Liz Charlotte Grant, who's an award-winning nonfiction writer based in Colorado. She has written the book Knock at the Sky, Seeking God in Genesis After Losing Faith in the Bible, which I can't wait to get into that because Genesis is coming from a fundamentalist background. Genesis is full of landmines as a progressive. So I'd love to talk about getting back into that. She has a Substack newsletter called the Empathy List, which has received recognition from the Webby Awards and the Best of the Church Press Awards. And her op-eds and stories have been published in a number of different venues: Huffington Post, Religion News Service, Sojourners, Christian Century, Christianity Today. So she's the real deal.
She's the real deal, indeed.
That's right.
Yeah. And, to boot for you too, Liz, is the fact that, I was bowled over that you have a little blurb there from Barbara Brown Taylor, who I am totally fanboying her. I just finished listening to her book, How to Walk in the Dark. Oh, what a great book.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, if you're running in that kind of caliber, then, this is awesome, to be sure. So it's great to have you on the show, Liz.
Thank you.
By the way, is it Liz?
For Barbara too.
Oh, how can you not be? Because she's so good. But I want to make sure that we are doing this correctly. Is it Liz or Liz Charlotte?
Call me Liz.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure.
Sure. Go for it. Never been called that.
Oh, there you are. Elsie.
I'm not going to stop you.
We're just going to start something new. And I'm glad that you are a fangirl of Barbara Brown Taylor because, yeah, she is pretty rockin' awesome. So, all right. It's great to have you on this episode of Radical Love Live. So I guess we're going to dive in and we're going to ask you the question that we always love to ask our guests. Tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey.
Well, it's been really easy. So I don't have much to say.
Okay.
No, I grew up in white American evangelicalism. So
oh boy.
I think y'all know a little bit about that. That's kind of making headlines lately.
Yeah.
Has been since the 80s, really. But I think at this point, I mean, I grew up in like a Bill Hybels version of that. So Kelly, you mentioned fundamentalism. So it was not fundamentalism. It also was not, I don't know, it wasn't highly intellectual either. Sometimes the kind of Calvinist Reformed version can get really heady. It was pretty light.
So do you have a worship band?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Of course you have to,
band.
right? Yeah.
Had to. We attended like Bill Hybels had his like leadership conference every year, and I went to one with Bono. So got to see Bono on a video screen.
Wow,
talking
that's
about-
wild, because I know that Bono is so Christian, but also so not institutional. Like I think,
Yeah, right. How did that happen? Was that because of money? I mean, like,
oh, I'm sure. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things you're like, Bono was like hanging out with Eugene Peterson though for a while. I remember Eugene Peterson was his pastor, or he considered him his pastor. He was like going up to Montana to hang out with Eugene. So I think Bono was kind of in that world a little bit at that time,
That's
but
something
I'm not
new.
really sure.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how Bill pulled that off, but influence, power, money, you know.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Well, I do remember there was a time when, I don't know if this is around that same time, that Bono was palling around with George W. Bush, because of all the Republican presidents, George W. Bush did all these efforts to help AIDS patients in Africa, which is one of the Millennium Goals of the of the one
of Project Red and everything he was doing. So there's there.
So
there's
weird connections.
To that end, very quickly, this is not the topic of our conversation. Obviously, it's all about you, Liz, and your book. But that is, but there is something to be said about that, because when we other somebody because they do something that we don't like, that's problematic. And I've learned that even my own self. It's like, I cannot. So if Bono is pounding around for with W because it helped, for a greater good about reducing the AIDS crisis in Africa or whatever else, okay, I guess I'm going to be kind of okay with that, right? I may not fully understand it, may not fully agree, but it's serving a greater good. So, but that's it. Let's move along. So.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and thank you for that, though, because it's very easy to get into those binaries of like, that group, that person, that church is evil, and this one is good.
That's right.
And it's never quite 100% accurate.
Yeah, it's not as simple as the binary. I know, right? So let's to that point. Wouldn't it be great if everything was just binary?
I mean, I think that's why people are attracted to those type of Christian expressions, right?
Yeah.
We like binaries. I mean, that's how we think. And I think that's how probably evolutionarily we were made to, like that's how we evolved.
Amen.
And so I think, yeah, I understand the appeal.
So, okay, your book is about Genesis, and you just used something, though, that you just used the word evolve. Like, that doesn't go with Genesis, I thought. Like, are you going to help us out in that area?
I'm going to help you out with that. Yeah,
okay.
I am a Christian who believes in evolution. Do I know how that happened? No. Like, I think the reality is, a lot of us, cosmology is just a mystery. And so anybody who tells you otherwise is selling you something. So I think that we can safely say that God made the world and that the world evolved. And I don't know how those combine, and I don't have to know. And I feel totally content with that. I wrote this book on Genesis, but I determined not to spend time on the question of historicity too much, because I shouldn't say everyone, the majority of people who write books about Genesis or talk about Genesis or teach about Genesis come at it from this very scientific, historical perspective. Either it is completely mythic, and so there is no history, right? Or we have to prove that it is mythic, so then it's like a proof text for that. Or it is, young earth creationism.
Right. And then we try to figure out who, Cain and
duke it
Seth
out, right?
married
Exactly.
to have kids with. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Cain married an unnamed cousin, right? Or something. Anyway, I think one of the things that I found compelling about this project for myself was being able to engage the scriptures a totally different way, to say, what does it look like to engage them as a work of art, as a work of literature? With any work of literature, you sort of surrender yourself to the narrative. You surrender to the flow, the characters, the themes, the voice. There is a sense where you just kind of jump in the river. Let it lead you where it leads you. And so for me, I kind of determined, for some reason, my religious ancestors, period, they found this book meaningful as a work of literature. I am going to surrender to it as it is and not ask those kind of bigger scientific questions. I'm not qualified to answer those questions. I'm a creative writer, so
Mm-hmm.
I can read a work of literature. And that's kind of what I determined to do. I wanted to figure out, what does this still have to say to us even now, beyond these kind of scientific, historical, mythic categories? Can we still find something here as a work of literature?
So going back a step, because we were at the altar in front of the worship band back in church. What was the impetus what was the push that changed your view of the Bible from that to where you are now?
Yeah, because I was a biblical inerrantist, right? I mean, that's kind of the evangelical thing is, the Bible must be taken literally, read plainly, and applied in every aspect of life, sort of a straight line from here to there. What's interesting is I went to Wheaton College, so I, came up through the youth group in my church, did all the mission trips, did everything. I even went to a private Christian school for a bit there, and then ended up at Wheaton, big evangelical institution out in Chicago. But I studied creative writing. So
Okay.
what was interesting about that was that I got
Is that
to
an
meet a lot of other.
oxymoron?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably.
Okay. Creative writing, evangelical.
You would think, you would think so, but you would also, you could say that Christian and Democrat is an oxymoron, and I don't think that's the case anymore.
That is true.
So-
It's like, how is that possible?
Yep. That's what I used to think. Not anymore. I think being able to read widely was a huge impetus toward kind of another expression of faith. I just did not know there were other expressions. During college, I converted to Anglicanism, and I mean Anglicanism because, there is a denomination that is an evangelical Anglican denomination in the US. That's the one I went.
That's the ACNA.
Yep. Yeah. At the time it was called EMEA, and then they became ACNA. And from there, I actually went to an Acts 29 church. I did the whole gamut of things, but really what it was getting to see the expression of faith on the ground and saying, what does this look like? What does the median expression look like in people's lives? So, for example, the theology known as complementarianism, which is, patriarchal gender roles, the median expression, as I looked at it, and this was in a ministry perspective too. I was a lay counselor at an Acts 29 church. And by that, I was very clear, I'm not a therapist. Please get a therapist. I am here to sit with you, to walk with you, to pray with you. That's about it. But I was meeting with all the people in the church who were about, they were almost out the door themselves, right? They were in marriages that were collapsing. They had addiction problems. They had, we led a recovery group that was like an approved recovery curriculum by Acts 29, a rewritten AA kind of thing. And we did our best to just be very present with people. And I say it was me and my husband initially who were leading this group. But when I would meet with people one-on-one, I found that the median expression of complementarianism often looked abusive. It looked like women's desires, passions, wisdom was all being kind of subsumed in this, I don't know, this role that said she was only allowed to just kind of do things for her husband. Like she might have a job, but she still had to do all the things that the trad wives had to do, right? Like there was no like middle ground. Yeah.
Serve his needs.
And there was marital rape happening, and there was this and that, right? Like, so in significant ways, women were being disenfranchised and actually abused and harmed through this theology. And so when I was kind of in those settings with people, and I would bring concerns, with their permission to the pastors, the way that the pastors would respond, I felt like was completely dim-witted. I mean, it just was like they had no idea what to do. And they used the Bible as this kind of weapon often against these people. And I just saw that happen over and over again. I mean, walking through people getting divorced or kind of telling the truth about their marriages for the first time and then feeling like they don't have an advocate at church. It was so infuriating. I left that internship and could not go to church for several years because I was so heartbroken by the way this institution had failed these people. And it was clear to me that the aim was not so much, church for the broken, which is the picture that Jesus gives us. He didn't come for the healthy, came for the sick,
Came for the sinners. Yeah.
came for the sick, the people who confess their sins and repent. Those are the ones that Jesus wants in the tribe. The people who have it all together, the people who are all alike, the people who are not struggling, not aware of their need. Those are not the people that Jesus brings into the fold. And I realized I viewed church as a very different thing than I had been taught that it was in white American evangelicalism, within the Bill Hybels model. And so I think a combination of those things, plus going through therapy myself to deal with family of origin issues, plus reading really widely, all of those things kind of contributed to this shifting interior faith landscape. All of a sudden it was just different. And I couldn't really explain why. And I struggled for a long time because of my evangelical theology with the question about gay marriage and about, where do LGBTQ folks fit and et cetera, et cetera. And was really troubled by what I saw because of the way that my colleagues and peers dehumanized these sweet people in our midst, and it was kind of the same thing.
Stumbling block.
It was really tough. Yeah. So for me, I think I realized I would rather be wrong in the direction of love. Like I would always rather be wrong in the direction of love.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
so
you for saying that, Liz. It's so well, like you captured it. Like I've never thought of it from the words you just used. But if you're going to be wrong, you'd rather be wrong in the direction of love versus being right when looking at the language and how they pick part and dehumanize. I've never thought of it from that point of view. Thank you for saying that.
yeah,
Yeah.
for me, that was really important to come to that and say, I don't have to be right. And probably I'm wrong about lots of things.
Right.
I continue to be wrong about lots of things, right?
Well, so I have a
Yeah.
question for you. Can I, on
Yes,
that?
yeah.
So obviously you've been on this journey, and as you're unveiling it to us and what you share, I'm sure some of this is in the book as well. Where do you, because that's a confidence and a courage that you've reconciled with your own faith, knowing, as you just said, I would rather be wrong and be on the side of love, because now you're like getting into existential questions about yourself, your faith, and and how you look at afterlife or whatever that means to you. And like that's a lot. That packs a powerful punch, because that's where the fear is probably going to stop somebody go, well, I want to do that also, but I also don't want to go to hell.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of my journey through therapy was being able to individuate, learning how to individuate. That's not something that I learned at church, not something I learned in my family. It was not a popular thing to set boundaries, but I think in therapy, I sort of rediscovered this sense of self, including like a spiritual autonomy.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that too.
Yeah. Mhm.
Again, because you did the work, and that's a term that I have not ever used for myself, and I've not heard it. That's like this another one, spiritual autonomy. I know what boundaries are. I know those through AA because I had to learn boundaries for myself because I didn't know. But spiritual autonomy, like we are given the right and the authority to have that, but it is taken away from us. And like, well, what do you mean you have autonomy? You can't be doing that, because if you do this, then you're going to go off into paths that you and areas that you don't want to go. So don't do that.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
and I would even go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say there's a whole tradition of, that our desires are evil, so that if we just do what we want rather than what the institution tells us to do, then we're going to be doomed.
Totally doomed. You're going to be an addict. You're going to you're just going to be all these things or whatever.
Pervert.
Pervert. That's right. You're a pervert.
Yeah. Whatever is the worst thing you can think of, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Whatever the worst thing that somebody could think of is what you are going to become, because you didn't toe the line and you were told this is how this is going to go. And you also bring up something else, Elizabeth, that gets me all feisty as I'm about to go there, is, you were talking about how somebody, talking about you want to be, for you, it's okay to be on the wrong side if it means in the direction of love, where somebody could counterpoint that with you and say, well, I do love too. I love them so much that I'm telling them what they need to do to save themselves. Cause like in spite of their own abilities, right? It's like, that's icky and gross.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that many times.
Mm.
I think
Right.
what I would say to that is that love is not expressed by what we say to each other. Love is expressed by what we do. And so, how does your love express itself? Are you listening better? Are you making space for another person to be themselves, to live the way that they want to live? I mean, ultimately, these are questions about relationship, right? Like, what kind of relationships do we want? Do we want functional relationships that allow each person to be an individuated individual person? Do we affirm their individual personhood before God? Or do we control it? Do we, I think what I found is that evangelicalism so often called things love that were really control.
Oh, absolutely. It is
Or they
definitely.
called things love that were fear,
Yeah.
and it was always kind of rooted in this like deep fear
Mm,
of God. And I
totally.
think once
Absolutely.
once I came to this other side where I was like, I don't think God's like that. I don't think sin is the root of the universe. I think love is. I think generosity is at the base of the universe. That really shifted how I saw these things. All of a sudden, it wasn't,
Mm.
I'm going to be sent to hell if I get it wrong. It was, I am on a journey. I get to walk alongside God and learn from God and learn in my own way, in my own time. And that is the beauty of a spiritual walk. It's not a one-time thing. This is a journey that we're on. And God seems to be okay with that. How does Jesus treat sinners? That was huge for me.
Uh, okay. What do you mean by that? It was huge for you. Would that he could love in sinners
I
like
think
he?
for me, realizing that Jesus doesn't hate sinners, because I think that was actually what I really learned. In practice, it was, Jesus is just sort of putting up with you. He actually really hates you. God
Right,
actually,
like, he's so mad, like,
he's so
he had
angry
to
at
kill
you.
himself to just
Oh
get
my
over
God.
how mad he was at you.
So Liz, where did you get that? Was that in the teachings in your environment that was, because you
I
don't strike
think,
me as a
yeah.
type that would come up with that kind of.
Oh, yeah. I think, well, I came from a dysfunctional family, so that's part of
Mm,
that. But I
okay.
think also Reformed theology, I mean, that is the message over and over again. It is, you are bad, and you're so bad that God had to die.
Yeah, the
Of
whole,
course,
like,
you're
total depravity.
exactly. So you're operating at the God level of all of this, Jesus being the Son of God, the manifestation of that.
Right.
So therefore, it just makes sense that the sinners, all those that he was, his works he was doing with, he despised them as well because he's the Son of
Yeah.
God. Was that where you were
Oh, yeah.
making the connection? Oh my God, oh my God, I've
Yeah.
never thought about that. Like being in that kind of construct where just like everything is just depraved.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
mean,
and
and that
God.
is what's
you're born that way, like, the
Oh,
choices that Adam and Eve made fundamentally changed creation. The DNA level were
yeah.
all warped and twisted, and only through this grace and election of God. Sorry, I'm getting all
no,
preachy
No,
here.
that's it. That's
and
it.
so and so this is why so Liz, again, I'm loving this conversation with you because Kelly, I think about the 5 years you and I have been together on this show, and a lot of people that we've talked to. It has never occurred to me to think at that level. And when I think about the original sin, about Genesis and Adam and Eve in the Bible, or the serpent and the apple, I'm like, yeah. And the reason why that doesn't connect to me or resonate internally is because I got hurt by church as a young kid before I could really know the Bible deeply, right? The really, because I was like, ugh, and I just kind of turned it all off.
Mhm.
So it's only been on this side of my journey after sobriety and all this other stuff like that, where I've been able to actually look at it. And, the story is like, yes, it's okay, yeah, fine. Right. It doesn't strike at me the same way as it would you two or others
Mhm.
who grew up in this kind of like theology, I guess. Like this
Yeah.
is,
I mean,
oh
it
my
was a
God.
culture. It wasn't even just, and I think it's for women in particular, it is not
Yeah.
just that you are bad. It's like you are disgusting to God. Like your body is
Oh
bad.
Covered.
God.
So a big part of my journey too, and I'm a fat woman. And so for me, actually realizing that me as a fat woman, I am not disgusting to God.
Oh, no, you're absolutely our
Like
God.
And
I
I
have the
would
imago
definitely use a
Dei.
much more body positive term.
Well, and fat is actually okay to me. I'm totally fine with
Yeah.
that. That's not
Good
actually a
for you.
negative thing to me. I'm using it just neutral when
You're
I say
empowering
that.
it.
I love you
Yeah.
for saying that. Absolutely. Yep.
But I think, and actually that was my editor, and she's very open about this. She also is a fat woman. And so for her, she and I connected on this in particular. And she was like, I think it would be really interesting for you to reflect on the Imago Dei from that perspective, to say,
Amen.
what does it mean in your body, in every body, to image God? You know, what does it look like to be a bearer of God's self, even if you don't have the ideal body, right?
Uh,
Because by the way, we don't. There is not one person I know who has the ideal body, and even if they do, that is so fleeting, right? It's not something we hold forever or keep forever.
And it
So,
still
but I
goes
think
away if you walk in on them in the bathroom. So yeah.
exactly, right, in a weird position. You're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Right.
never
Oh,
mind.
yeah.
Oh, don't
Right.
want to see
Right.
that. But I think, going back to that idea,
Sorry.
It's kind of like,
Sorry to take us that way.
it's kind of like walking in on your partner. You're like,
Uh,
oh, okay, that's an odd
that's not as
angle.
cute.
yeah.
That's not
That's
so
not
cute.
Let's not honest. Well, oh no, let's not be honest. This is no, because our spouses could listen to this. No, no, nope, you're
Mm.
perfect. Don't worry
Our
about it. Never
spouses are
mind.
amazing. We love you. Yes.
Absolutely.
Every
I
square
know.
inch of your body. Yeah.
I know. It's amazing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Oh
I
my.
think one of the things that was so transformative for me was realizing, going back to that original idea, is that Jesus is so kind to sinners. Like
Mhm.
it feels like the most obvious thing in the world. But Jesus wasn't mad at me.
Mm.
Jesus just wanted to be around me, just to make space for me. I think realizing that my ontological being, my core, was actually this deep love.
Mm.
I read Henry Nouwen's Life of the Beloved, and for me,
Ah,
I probably
yeah.
read it 5 times.
Mm.
I needed to go back and back to that reality that the core of us is not hate, it's not disgust, it's not,
Mm.
it is the deep, abiding love of God. And that
Mhm.
voice of love is the voice that calls to us. That's the reason that we come to God. It's not guilt. It's not because of sin. It's because of God's deep love for us. And that changed my life.
Did it change? One of the ideas that I find fascinating is salvation. The whole, like, you have,
Mm.
the other side of the depravity is you have to have a transaction in order to be worthy, in order to be saved. Do you still have a sense of the need for salvation, or has that changed?
That's an interesting question. I do think my conception of it has changed some. In college, I was told that my thinking about this was pretty orthodox, as in Eastern Orthodox.
Uh-huh.
So by accident, I started thinking about salvation not as a line that you crossed, like a, you know, capitalistic trade, like I
Mhm.
give you this, you give me that,
I'm a member of the
So it
club
was
now.
yes, right.
Quid pro quo,
So,
right? Yeah.
right, right. So it wasn't that anymore to me. And this was even in college, I realized I had already thought like this. It's just nobody had given me like language or words for it.
Yep.
Mhm.
But I started to see salvation as the spectrum of closeness or distance
Mhm.
from God.
Mm.
Are we traveling toward and with God, or are we traveling away? Are we turning toward God? Or are we turning away? And that became a much more relational picture to me of, what is the life of faith actually look like? From on a day-to-day basis, what does it look like? Am I resisting love? Am I resisting mercy and generosity in my life? Or am I opening myself to those things? If I am led by fear, then I'm actually walking away from God.
Oh, wow.
Because God is
Yeah.
love, right? So if I am
Absolutely.
being motivated by fear, by anxiety, by anger, those are not emotions that are necessarily distinct from God, but often they take me away. So
Yeah.
often I will do things from those emotions that kind of push me in the other direction. It's not always the case, but when I kind of break down my days and really figure out, when am I being motivated by love versus fear, it tends to be very revealing. Those moments when I'm motivated by love, I'm near God. I can feel it. I can see it. The things that I'm
Yep.
doing are motivated by that spirit of love and acceptance and radical grace. And that's
Amen.
kind of what I'm reaching for. You know what I mean? Like, that's the funny thing about this is like, it's not a one-time thing because we're in a relationship with an invisible deity. And it's very hard to feel attached to that deity. And so I think we sometimes have to, as the mystics did before us, rely on these kind of emotive expressions of ourselves and our days and kind of bring those to God and try to discern, is God here and where is God?
Yeah.
I'm looking. Where?
I love the language that you use around that. You definitely,
I do.
creative writing was definitely the right path.
Oh, definitely. You're good. You're really good, Liz.
Yeah, really.
I mean, I know. I'm not saying it just because you're a guest on the show. I was like, wow, as you were just sharing, I was like, you
just
are very good.
Like moving on the waves of the
Mhm.
poetry there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm thinking, so do you consider yourself a theologian or how do you define yourself in that aspect? I mean, you're obviously an author, but like you're good. What are you doing with
Yeah,
this?
yeah. I have taught the Bible as a layperson a lot.
Mhm.
I don't have a seminary degree. And in
You
fact,
don't
it's so
need one.
funny. So funny
Jesus
when I
didn't
started
either.
writing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I started
Jesus
writing
didn't
this, it
have
was
one,
the
right.
same. Yeah, it was the
Yeah.
same thing where I was writing in community with people, and
Mm.
my writing mentor at the time was like, I don't want you to go to seminary. I actually asked him, I was like,
Agreed.
should I go? And
Nope.
he said, I think this perspective that you bring is unique. And that is more important than getting the language right or
Amen.
Wow.
right,
Absolutely. Best
having the
thing,
degree.
absolutely. Best thing that ever happened to me early on, I felt a call to like explore ordination. And so my priest, I'm Episcopal in that tradition. So my priest, she said, yeah, I don't know about that. I'm like, yeah, I don't. I was like, not dismissive of what she was suggesting, but I was like, oh, I don't know if you're spot on or not. And she's like, okay, fine. Well, you do you, boo, with your discernment. And as the process goes, and it was when I was at Gethsemane on a silent retreat for this very purpose that I got a very clear and resounding no. And I knew why. It was, I am called to do something else that having that collar, having the ordainment, going to seminary would be not a good thing. This is not where I need to be. Folks like you, folks like me, folks like Kelly, us that are public theologians, or those that are out in these, I don't want to say margins because that's not a fair word for us in this case. We have been called not to do the traditional track because we can speak in a language that is unbiased and maybe not as churched, but that is a beautiful thing because, as we just said, Jesus didn't go to seminary. He didn't have a college degree. Okay, so he's a son of God. There's that. But I mean, but there's
Life experience.
right. I mean, just bringing your own life experience and your own faith journey into conversations. There's nothing more authentic than that, right? We don't have an ulterior motive. There is no bias. And I don't want to say that because for our listeners that are ordained, I'm not trying to, smack you in the face here, but we have a freedom that comes with that. And that's ultimately where Teresa, the priest who said that was her entire point. She's like, I think you're called to evangelize. Just saying. So
Oh,
yeah, no, in that space, that's where you need to be. And so, that's where I am. So there you are.
yeah.
Tons. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Liz, I want to give you a chance to talk about Genesis. Like, how did you rediscover Genesis? because it's really, it's really fraught. I mean, with, especially if you think about it in like a scientific versus spiritual way.
It's a potent weapon of the culture wars, isn't it? It's a tool used against a lot of people.
You're being kind when you say tool. I would think weapon, cudgel, hammer, sledgehammer, axe.
Shillelagh.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
I think, oh no, I love your laughter. I hope you always laugh like this.
When we have great guests, yes.
That's fair. Yeah. I think, it's so funny because I didn't mean to write about Genesis, but I wanted to write about the prophets because I've been, for a long time, obviously we live in this time where the words of the prophets are especially relevant, it feels to me. But I really love the strangeness of the prophets, and I really wanted to kind of spend some time there. And that'll be my next project, I think. But this one came about because as I was exploring the ideas of the prophets, I kept coming back to the idea of the voice that animates the prophets, which is God's voice. And I went backwards, where does the voice first show up? And of course, here we are in Genesis. But I think what animated me was this question about ancestors and origins. When we're talking about, when we're talking about Genesis, we're talking about the origin story according to the Hebrews, according to Christians. And I started to be very interested in these encounters, these like primordial encounters with God. What can we learn from them just within the narrative? And again, I didn't focus in on the historicity of it. I focused on, jumping in the stream, right, with these people. They have no knowledge of God before God shows up speaking. And so what did they understand of God? And what did, really it's our ancestors who are writing the story about these people, right? And so what are they trying to communicate about God? What was so important about this that they told the story in these different ways? And what did their encounters look like? I think the multi-layered idea of the writing of this book, which in some places is 4,000 years old, I was really fascinated. I just wanted to get kind of back to the sort of wonder of it. And I think I wanted to see what else was there. I think most of the book ends up on the story of Abraham. And that was harder for me because I had to deal with questions about institution and kind of how do we interpret the scriptures? What are the hermeneutics we use? And actually my editor sort of found an accidental hook in the work. I was like, I don't want to make this hooky at all. Like, I don't want it to tie it to anything. And she was like, but I see you poking at the question of inerrancy, question of biblical inerrancy, because what you're doing is you're saying, here's a different way, a different mode to read, which is really eisegesis, but is also, I layer in stories of science, like origin stories of science, art stories. So fine art criticism is in there, some memoirs in there. And so I'm like layering all these things on, and it's just a really different way to examine the scriptures. And I also relied heavily on the Midrashic sources to try to understand Genesis, because that was something I just did not get when I was growing up and was very curious to figure out, how do the Jewish people read these stories? These were theirs first,
Absolutely. It's their stories.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, at a conference called Christian Fellowship, Queer Christian Fellowship in Atlanta 2 weeks ago. And there was so much talk about Genesis. And I had the absolute pleasure of having dinner with Amanda Pence, who is a biblical scholar, graduate of Biola in Southern California. Oh, and she can talk Genesis. Oh my God. But she referred directly to the Midrashic, like in the interpretation, and listening to her, and me being, not a biblical scholar in any shape or form, but I find the Bible and the text to be fascinating, where there's, to open it up to the curiosity of like, don't worry about the inerrancy about it or anything else, but just look at the stories. So these are our ancestors, as you said. They were compelled to share these stories for a reason. How did they see the world at their particular time? And I find that fascinating, right? That they were using it to what does this mean to them at this particular time? the exact same questions that we're asking today. So there's something to be learned through all of that and take it through this lens. But unfortunately, we're not taught this. To your point, what you said, who does this? Like, we're not encouraged, at least especially in the Christian tradition, maybe in the Jewish tradition, because they ask questions. Oh, what a concept. But, it's like, we should explore it and ask, how does this feel? How does it, when we put it on, does this fit? Does it not fit? And, quit worrying about the inerrancy or arguing over, is it real or is it not? I think you're missing the point altogether.
Right. I find the Midrash interesting, but also frustrating. I've been working on a writing piece about salvation and atonement, and talked with a friend of mine who's a scholar of Jewish studies, and he pointed me toward a book called The Sages, which is the Ephraim Erbach compilation of all these Midrashic rabbis. And I thought for a moment, foolishly, that I was going to find an answer, that I was going to zero in on, like, this is what ancient Hebrews thought about, or this is what the Hebrews of the first, the Jewish scholars of the first century thought about atonement. There's 500 different ideas.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And each of them go off and start their own synagogues
Absolutely.
and their own communities. And then they argue with each other, and it's constant, like this constant churn of ideas. And I actually found more ideas than narrowing it down, which I think for some people could be, and for me, it's kind of frustrating, because I'm like, I want an answer, and I didn't come away with one.
You didn't get it. Sorry.
I came away with more questions.
Yeah, I think that's what I find compelling, because, the Hebrew people set this example of, they talk about God wrestling. It's like,
wrestling
Jacob.
God. Absolutely.
It's literally, you get in the dirt with this text, rip it apart. And one of my favorite parts, of course, is that there's so many legends too that surround the text, in the white spaces in between what we have actually in the scrolls of the Torah. There are all these other stories, right, that come to the fore, and the Jewish people are completely content to have those stories go along with the Bible. And, for me, it was like, I think realizing that this conversation has been ongoing and will continue to be ongoing, that we probably won't settle these questions today or tomorrow, right? They will be lifelong pursuit, God wrestling questions for the rest of our lives. For me, that actually feels comforting.
Absolutely. To your point, I'm kind of following on to that. But unfortunately, in the churches, like where you had your experience with Willow Creek, right? Or most folks, their experience is about certainty. And here you have to do certain things in order to be saved, or whatever, whatever language you use around that, to be holy, to be sanctified, blah, 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 blah. And this is the exact opposite. There's not a sanctification. There's not certainty here. It makes you ask questions. It makes you think. It makes you uncomfortable. And that's the problem. No wonder our faith, and, this is a conversation that could go on for an hour probably, but is this not one of the reasons why we see people just turning away? Because there's so much bad, flawed theology out there that's applied because it's built around certainty. And this faith, the Abrahamic faith, is not built on certainty. Now, you could do it through Islam or whatnot, but the Jewish scholars and the Jewish tradition, I think they got it right. Like, you should just ask the questions, and live in that kind of space. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just all wet, but I like the fact that I get to ask questions and nobody's yelling at me or telling me I'm going to go to hell for asking a question. So.
Right. Yeah, I always think of the scene where God's about to destroy Sodom, and Abraham's like, wait, what if there's 10 righteous people? God's like, okay. And he's like, no, wait, what if there's only one righteous people? Like, I love that he's got that boldness. Be like, hey, God, no, wait, let's bargain this out.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Like, have a conversation with God. Like, this is not, can we talk about this? So.
Yeah. And God's willing to be moved by human argument, which is also interesting.
Yeah, my favorite part about that story is actually the correction of the scribes. Have you guys heard of this? Tikkun Sopharim. I think it is, the Lord stood before Abraham is the original text. And the scribes changed it to Abraham stood before the Lord. And what was so interesting is that the first one is that Abraham is the one calling the meeting, right? To review God.
With God. Yeah. Hey, dude, I need to talk to you.
All right. And that was an issue with the scribes, and they kind of changed it, but they made a note, so we have this kind of original text where, God was willing to be taken into account. Abraham is the judge in that situation, not God. Wow. And I found that so inspiring and interesting. Yep. And yet, like, when Abraham has a chance to actually go warn the people because he gets this like foreknowledge about the city, he doesn't do it. He's not a prophet to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so it's this kind of complex story where you kind of see this character of God and this character of Abraham laid out. Abraham's happy to argue for the sake of people he doesn't know, but won't do it for the people in his household. And so you kind of, there's a struggle there. But I think what's so fascinating about that kind of back and forth with God and Abraham is that God allows himself to be questioned. Sorry, themselves, really. I don't think of God as male at all.
What? He's not male?
I hate to tell you this.
Okay, now see, we're going to get all these evangelicals really mad at us because you just said that. So
I hope they come talk to me.
Right. I say,
Give my
will
email.
have a conversation. Yeah, exactly. God love you for saying that, because, I even have the habit of defaulting to he. It's like, he's not she, it's they. That's the best I can do, is the they. So, but even then that's problematic, because what do you mean? There's more than one? Well, I don't know. I don't care. Just call it they and let's move on. Oh my God. All right. So as we're wrapping up this awesome time with you, Liz, LC. Yeah. Yeah. It's got a cool ring to it, right? So what parting words do you want to share with our audience about the book, your journey? Well, what are you up to? Where can people find you?
Yeah.
Turn it on.
Sorry, my alarm went off to pick up my children, so I don't forget them at school.
Okay. Okay.
Because I am liable to do that.
Yeah, that's like that great, like the thing that flashes on the dashboard, like, don't forget to check the back seat. Like,
that's
I have a
much
kid
what
back
it feels
there.
like. Yeah. You have children. Don't forget.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last word I'd love to leave is just to encourage folks to claim their own spiritual autonomy. You have God, you have the Holy Spirit with you, in my view, from what I understand. And that actually means that you have a lot more agency than you've been told. And I would encourage you to return to the scriptures with that agency.
Wow. I love that. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. We probably need to have you back again so we can do a little bit more, a deeper.
Well, I am open. So you guys let me know.
All
right. So, well, thank you again. Liz's book is Knock at the Sky, Seeking God in Genesis After Losing Faith in the Bible. It's available where books are found. Exactly. And we'll put links for Liz's website and other contact info in the show notes. So check it out. You can find out more about her and her work.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Brevity Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.
If you've ever deconstructed your faith, you know it's not easy. But just imagine if you could have people to guide you through your process. People like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zand, Paul Young, and more. Well, if you head over to www.choiracademy.com and register for Square 2 using the promo code RAD, you'll get 10% off the regular registration cost of this awesome course and community just for being a fan of our show.
Embark on a journey to the heart of an isolated and restrictive island where secrets simmer beneath the surface. In Brandon Andrus's What Can't Be Hidden, follow Thura as she uncovers the dark truths of Patrida, navigating through betrayal and redemption. This tale of courage, love, and the quest for freedom will captivate you from the very first page. Get What Can't Be Hidden, available now from Choir Publishing.
This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality, to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend calls it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Are you ready to embrace a deeper, more intentional way of living? Introducing Deep Calls to Deep, Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey, Volume 1 by Brandon Andrus. Deep Calls to Deep offers a 1.5 years of weekly meditations to inspire spiritual growth and guide you toward a more meaningful, embodied life. Order your copy today wherever books are sold and begin your journey into greater connection and purpose. Deep Calls to Deep. Let your soul awaken.